The glass caught the light first, crystal edges splintering it into shards that danced across the white tablecloth. My father's hand was steady as he raised it, his cufflink flashing like a signal flare. Then his voice followed, calm yet booming, built to reach every corner of the room. To the freeloader, he said, smiling as if it were the most natural toast in the world. The last one at this table who still hasn't figured out how to carry her own weight. The words cracked through me louder than the clink of glassware. Laughter spilled. Polite yet sharp. The kind that smooths cruelty by pretending it's a joke. Elias, my brother, chuckled low, shaking his head in a way that said, "That's Dad, always witty." Lydia pressed her lips together, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the silent endorsement she's perfected. My mother, Clara, touched her pearls, her answer to everything. Graceful avoidance polished into performance. And me, I didn't move. No smile. No defense. No blink. I let the words lodge where they landed. Freeloader. The label was already crawling across my skin like ink bleeding into paper. But inside, something sparked. A controlled burn, small at first, then spreading through my chest. Military training had taught me silence can be a shield, a pause sharper than a blade. So I sat still, steady, letting their laughter echo against me like bullets hitting armor. They didn't know it yet, but they'd fired the first shot. The dining room was a stage that night, as it always was. My father's empire, the illusion of being a self-made man, was built on scenes like this. Long tables, expensive wine, stories retold until they became fact. Marcus Rowan, the golden patriarch who built everything from nothing, and Elias, the heir, the golden boy, shining proof that hard work runs in the blood. I knew better. I had the receipts, both literal and metaphorical. Contracts with my father's signature scribbled over other people's ideas. Security logs I'd pulled late at night, watching the trail of company files redirected from my hands into his inbox. Even the congratulatory emails meant for me that he'd forwarded to himself with a single smug line handled by Marcus. Freeloader. The irony cut deeper than any insult. My fork was still on the table, my plate untouched. But my mind wasn't here anymore. It was already running back through the years of small jokes like this, each one meant to chip away at me until I believed it myself. Except I hadn't. I'd learned discipline in uniform steadiness under pressure and the art of waiting until the right moment to return fire. I caught Ivy's gaze across the table. Young, sharp-eyed, the kind of colleague who notices everything and says nothing until it matters. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just looked at me and then looked down, sliding her phone under the tablecloth. Later, I'd find out why. Later, I'd read the forwarded IT logs she'd slipped to me. But in that moment, all I saw was the flicker of someone else refusing to join the chorus. The dinner rolled on as if nothing had happened. Wine poured. Jokes flew. Elias launched into another story about a contract he closed, though I remembered the night I stayed awake writing the draft that made it possible. My mother leaned into her role as choreographer, smoothing the edges of every pause with a practiced smile, her way of keeping the illusion intact. And me? I sat in silence, steady as stone, recording every detail in the only place they couldn't touch memory. I've always kept the original email source files, handwritten drafts burned into me. Tonight, that included my father's toast. Because here's the truth, they never understood you can't erase a record once it's made. You can't laugh away a label once it's spoken. And you can't stop someone like me from keeping it all. So when my father lowered his glass and the laughter faded, I inhaled slow and even. I didn't raise a toast back. I didn't play along. I just let the fire burn quietly in my chest, knowing this was the beginning, not the end. Have you ever been branded with a label by your own family, one you never deserved? Drop a 1 if yes, a 0 if not. The house looked the same from the outside white shutters, brick that caught the late sun in honey tones, the front porch still lined with potted geraniums. My mother pretended she tended herself. But walking through the door always felt like stepping into a curated museum. Every detail was intentional, chosen not for comfort, but for narrative. Inside the walls were crowded with frames, smiling faces in golden light. Holiday dinners staged with perfect symmetry. Elias at graduation. Elias at his first boardroom table. Elias shaking hands with men my father called mentors. Each photo was like a chapter in the family's ongoing fairy tale. The golden boy rises proof of hard work, evidence of legacy. I scanned the walls slowly the way a soldier checks for exits, methodical eyes sharp, every detail accounted for. And what struck me wasn't just what was present, but what was missing. Nowhere among the endless portraits was I visible. Not in uniform, not in fatigues, not even a grainy snapshot of me boarding a plane. My years in the military had been erased like chalk from a slate. It was deliberate. I could tell. My mother Clara always prided herself on balance and even distribution of frames, each wall symmetrical. But here, symmetry told its own story. Elias multiplied me deleted. The spaces where my face might have hung were patched with smiling cousins. Second cousins, even Lydia's sorority photos. Anyone but me. I stood still in the hallway, letting the silence settle. The buzz of the refrigerator hummed faintly from the kitchen, a kind of mechanical heartbeat. From the living room came the clink of glasses, my father's laugh rolling out like smoke. But here in the corridor of curated memory, I felt the absence pressing harder than any sound. Memory is a battlefield. That's something the military taught me too. What you remember and what you erase shapes the war. And my family had drawn the lines carefully. Elias, the victor me, the ghost. One frame in particular caught my eye. A photo of Elias in a tailored suit grinning beside my father at a defense conference. I remembered the day because I had been there. I'd written the briefing paper he delivered on stage, the one that earned applause, the one that secured the contract. Yet here in the frame, there was only Elias and Marcus shoulder to shoulder as if I'd never existed at all. The anger that flared wasn't sharp. It was steady, coiled like a low fire that refuses to go out. I thought about the footlockers back in my apartment filled with originals, my deployment papers, the medals folded into velvet boxes, the commendations signed in ink, evidence of a life lived service rendered discipline earned, proof that could not be framed away. Ivy once told me, half joking, that my obsession with keeping originals made me paranoid. Maybe she was right. But standing there surrounded by curated lies, I understood why. Families edit. They crop. They retell until the story hardens. But a record, a real one, doesn't bend. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish, the kind that masks dust but doesn't erase it. That too felt like my mother's approach, shine over substance. I could almost hear her voice, light and dismissive. We didn't have a good photo of you in uniform, Ava. The lighting was unflattering. You wouldn't have wanted it displayed. But I would have. I would have wanted at least one sign that my years away, my nights in desert barracks, and my days under fluorescent command tents belonged to this family too. Instead, I was the shadow moving through their shrine to Elias. My fingers hovered over one frame, tempted to tilt it to break the symmetry, to leave a mark that proved I had been here. But I didn't. Discipline runs deep. I kept my hands by my sides, letting the fire burn inside instead of out. Because photographs are fragile glass cracks, prints fade. But what I carry, receipts, source files, unaltered records, are untouchable. And one day, when the curated walls collapse under their own weight, those originals will speak louder than any staged smile. For now, I walked on steady, letting the house press its version of memory against me. Every erased photo was fuel. Every missing frame a reminder. They wanted me invisible. But invisibility, I've learned, can be a kind of camouflage. And I knew how to fight from the shadows. The projector flickered to life with a low hum dust particles, catching the beam of light like fireflies in suspension. Elias stood at the front of the conference room, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on the clicker with casual confidence. He had perfected the stance, relaxed enough to look approachable, sharp enough to signal control. The audience leaned forward. They always did. On the screen, the first slide bloomed into color. The title, Emerge Building the Future of Secure Networks. I knew that name because I had helped choose it. I had sat with Elias in a coffee shop late one night, sketching options on napkins, running names against trademark databases, checking domain availability while he scrolled his phone. When the name clicked, he smiled, and I wrote the first angel check to make it real. The photo filling the slide was familiar too. A group shot champagne glasses raised smiles wide that night when the company was officially incorporated. The night I signed a check that drained my savings but fueled his start. I recognized the table, the glassware, the curve of the room's wallpaper. I even recognized myself, except I wasn't there. Not really. They had cropped me out. All that remained was a fragment, the corner of my sleeve, the edge of my wristwatch. The old steel military watch I still wore, its face scratched from desert sand. I knew it instantly the way a soldier knows their own weapon. To anyone else, it was background a blur at the border of the photo. To me, it was proof. Proof that I had been there, erased with precision, but never fully gone. The audience laughed at something Elias said. He was weaving his practice story now about hustle, about sacrifice, about how he'd built this from scratch with nothing but vision and grit. My father, sitting in the front row, nodded proudly, the patriarch approving the air. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye like she always did at milestones, pretending emotion while carefully checking who noticed. And me, sitting 3 rows back, felt that same fire crawl up my chest. This wasn't the first time. The cropping had happened again and again. Holiday photos trimmed to feature only Elias and Marcus. Magazine articles about the Rowan legacy that listed my father and brother as visionaries while my name never appeared. Even the company's early credit lines loans I had co-signed were rewritten in family lore as Elias's clever maneuvering. It was a pattern, a replay, erasure polished into strategy. My military mind framed it like reconnaissance repeated strikes, not accidents. Each crop, each omission designed to reinforce one story and bury another. Elias, the self-made star. Me, the ghost in the margins. I leaned back in my chair, steadying my breath. My eyes locked on that flicker of a watch at the edge of the photo. To most invisible. To me, undeniable. My instinct wasn't rage, it was calculation. Every crop leaves fingerprints. Every deletion leaves metadata. And I was the one who kept originals. I thought of the files at home, the uncropped versions of that same photo, the draft deck Elias had once emailed me with the full group shot, before edits, the timestamp logs that proved my hand in building the foundation. Receipts, all of it. Waiting. The projector hummed louder as Elias clicked to the next slide, his voice rising, polished, perfect. Applause followed, brief and bright. He soaked it in like sunlight. I didn't clap. My hands stayed folded in my lap, fingers pressing against each other steady. Because applause is fleeting. Records are not. That night, when the slideshow ended and the lights came up, Elias was swarmed with congratulations. Investors shook his hand. My father clapped his back. My mother whispered about legacy. Lydia smiled, silent as always, her loyalty stitched into her stillness. I slipped out quietly, unseen, my watch catching the light as I passed through the doorway. The same watch that marked me in the cropped photo. The same watch that reminded me ghosts can haunt the living. And if they thought they could crop me out forever, they hadn't learned the one rule I live by: every pattern leaves evidence. And I collect evidence the way they collect applause. The table stretched longer than it needed, to oak polish, to a gleam, candles burning in symmetrical intervals, wine glasses already sweating with anticipation. My mother had said it like she was staging a theater production. Every fork angled, every napkin folded into triangles sharp enough to cut. Place cards, 2-lined, in careful script names written in gold ink, each one claiming territory at the table. But not mine. I scanned twice to be sure. Marcus Rowan, of course, at the head. Clara to his right. Elias to his left. Lydia beside him, smile already stitched into place. Further down, family, friends, colleagues, even distant cousins all accounted for. Each seat marked, each presence validated. And me. My name wasn't there. It wasn't an oversight. Oversights don't happen in this house. Not with Clara arranging. If my mother could balance a floral centerpiece to match the curve of the chandelier, she could remember her daughter's name. My absence wasn't a mistake. It was choreography. So I didn't ask. I didn't protest. I simply pulled out the chair at the far end, the one nearest the server's cart where plates were stacked ready to be cleared. The chair reserved for someone passing through, not someone belonging. The kind of seat that says you're peripheral. I sat down quietly, my back to the service station, the faint scent of lemon polish clinging to the oak. From here, the whole tableau was visible. The family leaning in toward the center, laughter pooling where the light fell thickest, and me in shadow, an observer at the margins. There's a silence that comes with sitting at the edge. It isn't absence, it's precision. No one speaks to you unless they have to. No one includes you unless it serves a purpose. That silence sharpens your senses. You catch the whispers between cousins, the shift of a hand under the table, the way Marcus clears his throat before claiming credit for a deal Elias only pretends to have closed. From the corner, you see everything. The chair became my vantage point. I traced the patterns like reconnaissance, who turned their head when Shannon Liu's name was mentioned, who stiffened when Mr. Hale's approval was implied, who avoided eye contact when Marcus described his empire as built from grit alone. From here, I could see the choreography unraveling at the edges. But still, there was the sting. The reminder that my place had to be claimed, not offered. That my name inked nowhere carried less weight in this room than the menu cards printed for dessert. The server rolled the cart past me, the wheels squeaking faintly. She gave me the smallest glance, an apology in her eyes as if she too noticed the imbalance. I nodded back, silent acknowledgement between those assigned to the periphery. Elias raised his glass again, catching the light, the golden boy rehearsing yet another speech. To family, he said, smile, gleaming every word practiced for effect. Applause rippled. Forks clinked. My father leaned back, satisfied, his empire reaffirmed in the echo. I lifted my water glass, not the wine, and let the silence linger. It wasn't resistance, not outright. It was strategy. Silence here had more weight than words, and from my end of the table, I was taking notes. Every omission, every erasure, every gap in the narrative that one day would matter. Because if they thought leaving my name off a card would erase me, they didn't understand the discipline of a soldier or the vigilance of a cybersecurity consultant. I knew how to watch. I knew how to record, and I knew how to turn small silences into sharp evidence. The chair at the end wasn't punishment. It was vantage. And while they performed for each other in the light, I sat steady in the shadows, collecting everything they thought no one saw. The first toast should have been enough. One barb dressed in laughter, one label lobbed across the table like a dart freeloader, and the room had already decided it was entertainment. But Marcus never settled for a single strike when he could drive a point deeper. The wine had been poured again, red catching the light beads clinging to the glass like blood against crystal. He lifted his drink with deliberate ease, his voice cutting through the clatter of cutlery. Let's be honest, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in that half-smile he wore when he wanted cruelty mistaken for charm. Some of us at this table have carried the weight. And some of us, he paused, eyes sliding toward me, some of us only know how to freeload. The word hung heavier this time, no longer a joke, but a judgment. The air tightened. Forks stilled midair. A couple of cousins exchanged glances but didn't speak. Elias laughed, of course, short, sharp, complicit, and raised his glass high. To pulling your own weight, he declared, his voice echoing his father's cadence, the air practicing the king's tone. Glass met glass in a chorus of affirmation. Lydia smiled thinly, eyes down. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin, pretending not to notice. And me. My hand curled around the handle of the dinner knife. Not to use it, not in the way their whispers might one day paint me. But the pressure of the steel against my palm steadied me. The blade caught a glint of light, sharp and silent, reminding me of discipline, of patience, of edges honed for control. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't echo the words. I sat in silence, every muscle coiled but contained. Because silence can cut sharper than a retort. Silence can mark a moment more clearly than applause. I studied their faces, storing every detail. The gleam in Elias's eyes, hungry for his father's approval. Marcus's satisfied lean, his empire reinforced with a single toast. Clara's carefully composed smile, smoothing the fracture lines she refused to acknowledge. Lydia's complicity stitched into her stillness. Each expression logged, cataloged evidence for later. The toast ended, laughter rolled again. The room slipped back into its rhythm. Plates shifted, conversations resumed, the cruelty folded into normalcy as if it had never been spoken. That was the tactic: deliver the wound, bury it in noise, move on, as if nothing lingered. But I didn't move on. I felt the knife warm in my hand. I let the word replay in my mind, freeloader, not as an insult, but as evidence. Words spoken publicly, witnessed, recorded in silence. Proof that couldn't be erased by cropping a photo or omitting a name card. The second toast was more than cruelty. It was catalyst. A moment where laughter became testimony, where the family revealed the script they had rehearsed all along. And I, sitting at the far end, wasn't just the target. I was the witness. Discipline taught me to endure, but it also taught me to prepare. To recognize when a line had been crossed from jest to declaration. Tonight, Marcus had declared war. I set the knife down slowly, the blade catching one last shard of light before settling against the porcelain plate. My hands folded in my lap, steady again, though the fire inside burned hotter than before. The dinner continued, but everything had shifted. They thought their toast would erase me, diminish me. Instead, it marked the moment I stopped simply enduring. Some wounds close quietly. Some ignite. This one ignited. Flashbacks don't come to me gently. They don't blur around the edges or fade in like some movie reel. They slam open file by file, every detail intact, every timestamp stubborn. The first piece of evidence, the one I still think of as Exhibit A, was a prototype. Small, plain, palm-sized. To anyone else, it looked like a block of black casing with a stub of an antenna, the kind of thing you'd mistake for outdated equipment. But I knew what was inside because I had built it. Every circuit was born out of my own nights in desert barracks, soldering wires by flashlight, when power failed, piecing together a locator that could survive what the market's glossy devices never could black out. Zones, interference terrain that didn't care if you lived or not. I remember slipping it into a padded envelope years ago. My handwriting shaky from exhaustion, but steady on the address, my father's office. Marcus had asked what I'd been working on. For once, I thought maybe he wanted to see me, not the version he cropped out of photographs. Not the ghost at the edge of family slideshows. But me, his daughter soldier turned builder. I mailed it because some stubborn part of me still believed in that possibility. His voice when he called was casual. Too casual. Interesting little gadget, he said, like I'd handed him a paperweight. Might be useful. No acknowledgement of the sleepless nights, the deployments that had written its need across my skin. He only asked when he could show it off. Weeks later, there it was in the company newsletter. A glossy photo, Marcus Rowan shaking hands with his boss, Mr. Hale, across a conference table. The prototype sat between them, suddenly gleaming, presented in a velvet-lined box as though it were a luxury watch. The caption read, "A gift of innovation from Marcus Rowan to his partners at Hale Defense." My name didn't appear anywhere. I remember staring at the pixels until my eyes ached, seeing only the outline of that device, the scratches I'd tried to polish, the crooked angle, where one casing screw never sat flush. It was mine. And now it was theirs. I wasn't in that boardroom, but I know the scene. My father leaning back, voice rich with false humility. Just a little project I had lying around. Thought it might amuse you, Hale. Mr. Hale smiling, nodding, impressed by the illusion of generosity. The applause, the laughter, the myth of Marcus as innovator reinforced with one simple prop. I confronted him in the kitchen days later, the newsletter still folded in my hand. "That was my work," I said quietly. He didn't even turn from the refrigerator. "Don't be so sensitive, Ava. What's mine is yours. What's yours," he pulled out a bottle of wine, uncorked it with a practiced twist, "is ours." That was his favorite trick, repackaging theft as family unity. But ours never seemed to stretch wide enough to include my name. He underestimated me, though. I'd kept the schematics. The early drafts dated and signed. The email chain where I'd described the concept to him in detail. The photos of the rougher versions, wires, still exposed labels scrawled in my handwriting. Receipts stacked neatly in a locked box, originals no one could crop or reframe. The memory always ends the same way, me alone at my desk, military watch, ticking against my wrist. The hum of my computer filling the silence. The prototype rests in a photo on my screen, frozen in time as Marcus's gift, but beside it I keep the raw files, the evidence that rewrites the lie. Back at the dinner table, the flashback fades, but the taste of betrayal lingers like metal on the tongue. Marcus leans closer to Elias now, whispering something that makes them both laugh, the sound rolling across the table designed to drown me out. He thinks the device is forgotten, that his velvet box theater erased my fingerprints. But I haven't forgotten. I never forget. And one day when the empire he's staging starts to crack, Exhibit A will resurface. Not as his gift. Not as his achievement. But as what it always was mine. The second toast still echoed in my chest when she finally leaned in. Clara Rowan, my mother, the woman who could choreograph a dinner party like a general directing troops, shifted her gaze toward me, pearls glinting at her collarbones, smile soft as butter melting over heat. She didn't raise her voice, didn't scold, didn't cut like my father had. She just smiled. "Don't ruin the evening, Ava." She whispered the words, smooth-brushed with that same polish she used to shine silverware before guests arrived. "It's a celebration. Don't make it something it's not." And just like that, the blade twisted. It was her specialty. Where Marcus deployed blunt force insults disguised as humor declarations wrapped in toasts, Clara specialized in erasure by softness. A smile, a gentle tone, a reminder that conflict is uglier than cruelty. Her tactic wasn't to fight me. It was to fold me into silence, to insist that acknowledging the wound was worse than the wound itself. The table hummed with conversation, but her words landed like a command. My father chuckled at something Elias said. Glasses clinked. Lydia leaned in to murmur approval at her husband's every boast. The performance of family continued. And I, the daughter in uniform never pictured on the walls, sat with my mother's smile pressed against me like a hand smoothing wrinkles from a dress. "Don't ruin the evening." That phrase had been her refrain for years, when Marcus borrowed my ideas and repackaged them as his own. When Elias claimed victories built on my late-night drafts. When I came home on leave and found my photos missing from the hallway replaced with new frames of their triumphs. Each time Clara's smile swept in the broom that brushed the shards of truth under the rug. Don't ruin the evening. Don't stir the air. Don't demand space. And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, intentional. No one at the table contradicted her. No one asked what she meant or why I might be the one accused of ruin. Her smile sanctioned their avoidance, her gentleness became permission to look away. The smile erased me more effectively than my father's insults ever could. I thought back to childhood dinners when she'd pinch my wrist under the table if I argued too loudly, if I corrected a fact Marcus misremembered. "Let it go, Ava." She'd murmur, lips never losing their pleasant curve. "It's not worth it." And so the record of truth bent over and over until silence seemed the only acceptable language. But silence is not absence. Silence is presence denied. I felt it pressed down now, heavier than the polished oak table, heavier than the wine-laden glasses. My absence from the place cards, my erasure from the photographs, my cropping from the slideshows, all of it reinforced by this quiet strategy. Clara smiled, and suddenly I was the intruder for noticing what had been taken. The discipline drilled into me in the military taught me how to survive hostility. But it hadn't prepared me for this, the kind of combat where weapons are soft, where denial dresses itself as harmony. I gripped my water glass cool against my palm and reminded myself that records don't smile. Receipts don't deny. In my apartment, the originals wait. Photos uncropped, emails unedited, prototypes with my handwriting scrawled along the side. Clara can smile, Marcus can toast, Elias can bask, but the record doesn't bend. At the table, I met her eyes for a second. Her smile didn't falter. She thought she'd won that she'd smoothed me back into the script. I let the silence stand, outwardly compliant, inwardly logging the tactic for what it was. Evidence, too, comes in many forms. Sometimes it's not a stolen prototype or a cropped slide. Sometimes it's a mother's smile wielded like a shield to protect the illusion of family at the expense of truth. The dinner rolled forward. Dishes cleared. More laughter. I remained the ghost at the margin, erased not by force, but by charm. Yet in that erasure, I grew sharper. Each silence, each smile, another receipt for the archive. Because one day when the performance falters, I'll have the file ready, and no smile, no matter how polished, will be able to sweep it away. It was during dessert, the stage of the evening, when the performance usually softened sweet wine-sugared plates, laughter drifting easier across the table. But that night, the air grew tighter instead. The second toast still lingered, my mother's smile still pressed like a seal on silence when another move unfolded. Vera, the sister-in-law they'd all learned to call perfect, shifted delicately in her chair. Her dress shimmered under the chandelier pearls, catching the light as if they'd been scripted into the moment. She reached into her clutch and with a practiced flick of her manicured nails, slid a pale envelope across the table toward Elias. "Just a little coffee money." She said her voice light meant to sound like generosity. "For all the late nights you've been working." The envelope landed beside his plate, silent but heavy. Elias didn't look at her at first. He looked at me. Quick, sharp, as though checking whether I'd noticed. Then he grinned, picked it up, and tucked it into his jacket pocket with theatrical ease. "You're too good to me," he said. Laughter bubbled down the table, awkward and complicit. But I had noticed. That envelope wasn't coffee money. Not in this family. I'd seen it before, that exact stationery with its faint watermark, the kind used by Marcus's company for internal transfers. Petty cash drawn off accounts labeled miscellaneous expenses slipped neatly into personal pockets under the guise of small favors. I'd seen the log entries at work, the withdrawals tagged for client entertainment, but lining up too neatly with Elias's date nights or Lydia's shopping trips. The word coffee was their favorite code, an inside joke light enough to be dismissed, vague enough to pass. But I knew better. Behind the smile, it was theft dressed as indulgence. Evidence number 2, I thought. Exhibit B. The burn in my chest sharpened not just at the theft itself, but at the choreography of it. How casually it was done in plain view, disguised as sweetness. How easily the table swallowed it. Marcus smirked like a proud director watching his cast hit their marks. My mother sipped her wine eyes closed as though savoring flavor, not denial. Lydia smiled polished as ever, her silence tying the knot around the lie. No one spoke. No one blinked. Except me. I could almost hear the numbers shifting in my mind, the petty cash balance dropping the line item filed under miscellaneous. I could see the log Ivy had slipped to me weeks ago. Screenshots of withdrawals timed perfectly with family gatherings. Each line a breadcrumb. Each breadcrumb leading here to this moment where an envelope was slid across fine china without shame. The knife in my hand from earlier now rested flat against the table. I pressed my fingertip against the edge, grounding myself, resisting the urge to slice through the envelope right there to show them the receipts. But patience is its own weapon. Discipline is sharper than steel, so I sat silent, cataloging the evidence. The envelope wasn't just paper, it was a photograph burned into memory. Vera's manicured hand, Elias's grin, the complicit laughter, the word coffee floating like perfume over rot. I thought about how stories are built. Not in grand declarations, but in small rehearsed moments. A cropped slide here, a missing name card there, a smile that insists silence, an envelope that hides theft. Each piece small enough to dismiss. But stacked together, they become undeniable. The room swelled with chatter again as though nothing had happened. Elias leaned back, patting his pocket like a prize. Vera laughed softly, her pearls gleaming. Marcus launched into another story about his empire. Elias nodding along like an understudy waiting for his cue. And me, I sat at the edge, my chair beside the server's cart, steady, watchful. I didn't need to interrupt. The record was already written. Evidence number 2 was secure. Not in my hand, not on the table, but etched into the archive I carried. The originals would speak louder than my voice ever could in this moment. One day when the walls of this curated house began to crack, that envelope would resurface. Not as coffee money, not as kindness, but as theft, plain and undeniable. And when it did, their silence would speak louder than my words. That night, when the house finally fell quiet, I sat alone in my apartment with the glow of my laptop painting the walls in pale blue. The echoes of the dinner still clung to me. The toasts, the laughter, the envelope sliding across porcelain. My mother's smile pressed like a lid over the truth. They thought the night was finished, that their story had been told. But mine was only beginning. I opened my calendar. Rows of meetings stretched ahead, each block, neatly color-coded reminders pinging like quiet drumbeats of order. And then there it was, tomorrow's appointment, written not in the language of family, but in the language of rank, of merit, of identity they couldn't erase. Colonel Ava Rowan, Principal Cybersecurity Advisor. My own name unedited. My own title earned. For a long moment I stared at it, the words steady against the screen as if daring me to believe them. Colonel, not freeloader, not ghost, not erased. Colonel, a rank built on years of service deployments, survived nights under desert skies where silence meant survival. Principal Cybersecurity Advisor. A role earned not by surname, not by inheritance, but by discipline, by code I wrote, by systems I secured. And tomorrow that title would carry me into a boardroom where Marcus Rowan's empire couldn't shield him. Tomorrow I would sit across from Mr. Hale, the very man my father had spent decades trying to impress. I thought of the photo in the newsletter, Marcus handing over my prototype in a velvet box, Mr. Hale shaking his hand as though Marcus had crafted it himself. I thought of the toast at the table, the word freeloader spat like truth, echoed by Elias's glass. I thought of my mother's whisper. Don't ruin the evening, as if my silence was the only thing worth preserving. Tomorrow would not be an evening. Tomorrow would be daylight. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly beneath me, my military watch ticking steady on my wrist. In the stillness, I let the truth settle. They had erased me from photographs, slideshows, and seating charts, but they couldn't erase me from this. The calendar was a mirror they couldn't smudge. Colonel Ava Rowan. I whispered it once low, letting the syllables settle into the room. It didn't feel foreign. It felt like steel. The laptop hummed. Notifications popped in the corner, reminders of files Ivy had forwarded earlier that week. IT logs time-stamped precise, each one another breadcrumb leading to the truth. She trusted me with them because she knew what I carried wasn't just memory, it was an archive. I closed the window on the logs, opened the agenda for tomorrow's meeting. Pinnacle Defense. Shannon Liu presiding. I pictured her sharp-eyed, the kind of leader who saw through polish to substance. She had requested me by name. My name. Not Marcus's daughter, not Elias's shadow. Colonel Ava Rowan. The irony was sharp. While my family toasted to erase me, the industry that fed them was about to spotlight me. While Marcus polished lies to impress his boss, I would walk in with the truth of rank and role, undeniable, documented, logged. I exhaled slowly. Steady the way I had before stepping into command tents, before facing rooms where silence could cost lives. Tomorrow's room would be different, but no less tactical. My father would never imagine it. Elias would never believe it. Clara would never smile it away. But I knew. I let the screen dim slightly. The calendar still open, my title glowing faintly in the dark like a beacon. Tomorrow I would sit across from the man my father had courted for decades. Tomorrow I would shake his hand, not as Marcus's daughter, not as Elias's sister, but as what I had always been, my own name, my own record, my own evidence. Colonel Ava Rowan, Principal Cybersecurity Advisor. They erased me at the table. They erased me on the walls. But tomorrow in daylight, they would watch as the world called me by the name they tried to bury. And nothing, not a toast, not a smile, not a cropped photograph would be able to silence that. Morning light spilled across the lobby's marble floor, each ray catching on glass walls and polished steel, turning the space into something closer to a tribunal than an office. The logo of Pinnacle Defense rose high above the reception desk, silver letters gleaming, daring anyone who entered to measure themselves against it. I walked in steady military watch, ticking against my wrist uniform, pressed into civilian lines but still marked by discipline. At the desk, a young assistant glanced at the tablet in her hand, then at me. Guest of Marcus Rowan, she asked, lifting a slim badge with my father's name typed neatly across the top. Guest? 2 syllables meant to reduce years of service into a shadow role tethered to a man who had spent his life claiming credit for mine. I didn't take it. Before I could speak, the doors at the end of the lobby opened and Shannon Liu stepped through. CEO of Pinnacle Defense. Her presence carried the kind of gravity you can't fake, measured stride eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. Executives at her side shifted to match her pace, but she didn't look at them. She looked at me. Good morning, ma'am. The assistant froze. Executives blinked. My father's title, his guest dissolved in the air like smoke. Shannon walked straight to the desk, plucked the badge from the assistant's hand, and with a motion that was quiet but unmistakable, tore it clean in half. The snap of plastic was louder than any toast I'd endured at the family table. She set the broken pieces down, pulled a pen from her jacket pocket, and wrote on a new card herself, the ink pressing deep into the surface. Then she held it out to me. Colonel Ava Rowan, key partner. Not guest, not shadow, not daughter of Marcus. Key partner. The words burned brighter than the marble floors. Around us, the executives straightened, recalibrating. They weren't looking at Marcus's ghost anymore, they were looking at me. The title carried weight that no cropped photo or missing name card could erase. Colonel. Key partner. Truth documented in ink, recognized in daylight. I took the badge, clipped it to my jacket, and felt the shift settle like armor. Shannon's eyes lingered for a moment, calm but sharp as if to say, I know what you've built. I see what you've kept. And then she turned, gesturing for me to follow. Behind us, I imagined Marcus seeing the broken pieces of his narrative lying on the desk. All the toasts, the smiles, the erasures, they couldn't patch that badge back together. We entered the boardroom, the table sleek screens humming alive with encrypted data. Mr. Hale sat at the far end, surprise flickering across his face when Shannon introduced me by title. He had shaken my father's hand over stolen prototypes, but now he extended his hand to me, his tone careful, deliberate. Colonel Rowan. An honor. The silence that followed wasn't absence. It was presence thick and undeniable. My name, my rank, my work stood at the center. No one could crop it. No one could laugh it away. I thought of the dinner table, Marcus raising his glass. Elias echoing my mother whispering for me not to ruin the evening. And then I thought of this moment plastic badge snapped in half new ink marking the record. That was the turning point. The place where their story fractured and mine began to take form in public view. They had tried to bury me in silence, but here under fluorescent lights and marble echoes, the truth carried its own weight. Do you believe truth always finds its place? Drop a 1 if you believe, 0 if you doubt. The boardroom lights hummed softly cold against the glass walls that framed the city beyond. Executives settled into their chairs with the precision of an audience before a verdict. My badge, Colonel Ava Rowan, key partner, rested heavy but certain on my lapel. Marcus sat further down the table, his posture stiff, his smile stretched thin, the performance slipping at its edges. Shannon Liu gestured toward me. Colonel Rowan has something we should all see. I slid the folder from my bag, its spine worn smooth from being handled too often, the corners faintly creased. This was no prop polished in velvet. This was the archive. Originals. The table stilled as I opened it. Inside lay pages stamped with the unbending weight of truth. First, the code hash strings of alphanumeric signatures that meant nothing to the untrained eye, but everything to anyone who understood cybersecurity. Each line carried a digital fingerprint, unalterable proof of authorship. Next, the timestamps. Not vague memories or stories retold over wine, but exact records second by second, each one marking the moment I built, tested, deployed. Immutable. They glowed under the boardroom lights like coordinates etched into time itself. And then the contract. Paper, thick ink, deep my name written in full across the signature line. Ava Rowan. Not Marcus, not Elias. Mine. The gold Pentagon seal stamped in the corner shimmered under the light, an official insignia impossible to counterfeit. It carried authority no smile could dismiss, no toast could drown out. I slid the contract across the polished table toward Mr. Hale. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he studied the seal, his hand tracing the embossed edge with reverence. The room leaned with him, executives craning to see silence thick as gravity. This is the original, I said, my voice steady. Filed, logged, and certified. Every code line, every timestamp, every signature accounted for. Marcus shifted in his seat, his cufflinks catching the light as his hand twitched. This isn't necessary, he said quickly, too quickly. They know the work is ours. Our eye echoed my tone, even calm, a blade sheathed but sharp. Funny, the records show only one name. Eyes turned to him, then back to me, then to the contract glowing under the fluorescent light. For years, he had performed the myth of the self-made patriarch, the innovator, the visionary. And for years, I had been the silence at the edge, the ghost cropped from the frame. But ghosts once named, once documented, become undeniable. Ivy's logs, Vera's envelope, Marcus's stolen prototype, all of them had been pieces. But this here now, this was public, no longer whispered, no longer hidden in folders at home. The Pentagon seal turned my archive into testimony. Shannon nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. The record speaks clearly. Her words landed like a gavel. Mr. Hale looked at me, then his expression unreadable, but when he spoke, the weight of his tone left no doubt. Colonel Rowan, it's clear we've underestimated your role. He tapped the gold seal once more, deliberate. This changes things. The silence that followed wasn't the erasure I'd known at the dinner table. It wasn't complicity or avoidance or polished smiles smoothing over cruelty. It was recognition. Thick, undeniable recognition. I closed the folder, sliding it back into my bag, the lock snapping shut with a click that echoed louder than Marcus's toast ever had. Evidence number 3. Exhibit C. Public now. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was sitting at the edge of the table. I was at the center, my name intact, my work undeniable. And no amount of laughter, no envelope of coffee money, no mother's smile could sweep this away. Because once evidence is shown in daylight, it belongs to history. And history, unlike families, doesn't crop names out of the frame. Elias always loved the stage. Even as kids, he was the one who climbed onto chairs at birthdays, delivering half-baked speeches, while relatives clapped like he was a prodigy. That talent performance never left him. So when he stood at the front of Pinnacle's boardroom, suit-pressed, hair-gleaming voice, warm enough to pass for leadership, it felt like every other family gathering. Except this time, the stakes weren't applause over cake. This time, he was parading my work. The screen behind him lit with a framework I knew better than my own handwriting. Tiered layers of cybersecurity protocols, linked modules humming in sync. My design, my fingerprints buried in every line. I'd built it under Department of Defense contract, refined it in windowless rooms where coffee was fuel and silence was rule. Now Elias waved a hand toward it as if he'd conjured it in a weekend brainstorm. Here at Rowan Innovations, he said smoothly, we developed this system to anticipate breaches and neutralize them in real time. It's proprietary, battle-tested, and already catching attention from our partners. Partners. The word hung like perfume in the air. My father's empire gleamed brighter each time Elias spoke it. But then my eyes landed on the corner of the slide. They'd left the hash. Small, technical, and visible to most. But not to me. Not to anyone trained to read digital fingerprints. The hash tied the file to its origin server, Department of Defense, time-stamped, submitted under my credentials. My name coded into the DNA of the file itself. The knife edge of irony cut clean. They could crop my face, erase my photos, strip my name off contracts, but they hadn't thought to strip the code. I rose from my chair. The scrape of it against the polished floor cut through Elias's practiced cadence. Heads turned. The screen glowed behind him, his smile faltering just slightly as he caught my movement. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. That file, I said, steady as a soldier calling coordinates, was submitted through the Department of Defense by me. The hash confirms the source. Colonel Ava Rowan. The room froze. You could feel the shift air sucked out, silence pressing against the glass walls. Executives stiffened. Mr. Hale's eyes sharpened. Shannon Liu leaned forward, interest flickering like a spark. Elias blinked, his rehearsed rhythm slipping. He opened his mouth, maybe to charm, maybe to dismiss, but no words landed. For once, the golden boy stood without a script. The slide behind him betrayed him more than I ever could. Code hashes don't flatter. They don't embellish. They don't lie. They record. And that record had my name burned into it. I let the silence linger long enough for everyone in the room to read the truth between breaths. Long enough for Elias to feel what it was like to stand exposed, stripped of applause, stripped of polish, stripped down to someone else's work revealed as his borrowed costume. The weight of years condensed into that moment, the cropped photos, the envelopes passed across tables, the prototypes stolen and repackaged. All of it converged on this point where silence worked not as erasure, but as proof. Finally, Mr. Hale cleared his throat. His gaze swept from Elias to me, then back again, sharp as a verdict. If the hash confirms the source, he said slowly, then the record is clear. The record. That word reverberated through me like a drumbeat. Elias's cheeks flushed. His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard. We contributed. He stammered, but even he knew it was too late. The slide glowed behind him, unblinking, undeniable. I folded my hands on the table, my military watch catching the light. You can crop a photo. You can tear a name off a contract. But you can't change the math of a hash. That's the thing about evidence, it doesn't bend to narrative. Silence again. This time, it wasn't my erasure. It was his. And in that silence, for the first time, Elias wasn't the golden boy. He was just a man stripped bare standing in front of a room that finally saw whose work they'd been clapping for all along. The room was still heavy from Elias's stumble, the silence stretched thin when Shannon Liu rose from her seat. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Authority traveled with her like a current pulling every eye as she walked to the far end of the boardroom. There, standing tall against the glass wall, was an object I hadn't noticed when I entered, a frame draped with black cloth edges catching the light. Shannon rested her hand on the cloth, her gaze sweeping the room. For years, we've partnered with people who push the boundaries of defense, of technology, of resilience. Tonight, I want to acknowledge one of them. Her words cut through the tension, precise, deliberate. She tugged the cloth free. The fabric fell in a dark cascade, revealing a steel plaque mounted on polished stone. The surface gleamed like a mirror, letters etched deep enough to outlast time, Colonel Ava Rowan invisible until it mattered. Then irreplaceable. The words landed with more weight than any toast, any contract, any cropped photo. They were carved, not spoken, permanent. For a moment I couldn't move. My name, the name scrubbed from walls and slideshows, erased from family dinners, now stood engraved in steel, untouchable. It didn't need applause. It didn't need defense. It simply existed, undeniable, a truth that could not be smiled away or trimmed to fit a narrative. Gasps rippled through the executives. Some leaned forward to read the inscription again as though repetition might confirm what their eyes already knew. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses, his lips tightening, not in disapproval, but in something closer to respect. Elias shifted at the front of the room, his slide still frozen behind him, my framework glowing like evidence against him. His hands twitched at his sides, a man who'd spent his life owning the spotlight, now watching it burn through him instead. Marcus's jaw locked, his fingers drumming against the table. For decades, he had built his empire on polished lies and cropped truths. But you can't crop steel. You can't edit engraving. This was recognition carved into permanence, and it was mine. Shannon stepped back, letting the plaque catch the light. She turned to the room, her voice carrying calm authority. When we measure contributions, we don't measure them by who tells the story loudest. We measure by who holds the line when it matters. Colonel Rowan has done that. Again and again. Applause followed, not hesitant, not polite, but strong, deliberate. It filled the boardroom in a way family dinners never had, echoing against glass and steel, until it became something closer to a verdict. I rose slowly, the weight of the moment pressing steady in my chest. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I simply stood, letting the sound wash over me, letting the plaque reflect back the truth I had carried alone for years. In my mind, I saw the walls of my parents' house, the photos of Elias at every milestone, my face erased, my service invisible. I saw the dinner table, my name missing from the place cards. I saw the cropped slides, the stolen prototypes, the envelopes passed like jokes, all of it designed to bury me in silence. And then I saw this. Steel. My name. My rank. My worth immortalized where no hand could reach to erase it. I touched my military watch, feeling its steady tick against my wrist. Proof had always been my armor, receipts. Files, timestamps, contracts. But this was different. This was recognition turned to monument. Not mine alone, but public. Irrevocable. Shannon's words still hung in the air. Invisible until it mattered. Then irreplaceable. They weren't flattery. They were fact. My invisibility had been curated by family, but my irreplaceability was carved into history. Marcus didn't clap. Elias stared at the floor. My mother wasn't here to smile it away. And for once, I didn't need any of them. The plaque stood where their silence couldn't reach. In steel, the record was written. And no one, not a father's toast, not a brother's slide, not a mother's smile could crop me out again. 6 months can pass like a lifetime or like a blink, depending on what you're waiting for. For me, it was neither. It was steady, measured like the tick of my military watch against my wrist. In those months, the plaque at Pinnacle became more than steel on stone. It became a marker, a line of demarcation. Before and after, erasure and recognition, silence and record. And then one afternoon, the family arrived. They didn't come in force, not like the grand dinners with long tables and curated smiles. No champagne glasses, no envelopes sliding across porcelain. Just Marcus, Clara, Elias, and Lydia stepping into my apartment with the kind of hesitance you hear in a footstep more than a word. The air between us carried the weight of something unsaid. Marcus cleared his throat first. His empire-building baritone sounded smaller here, compressed by walls that didn't belong to him. We may have overlooked things, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. The phrasing was careful, as though he could reduce theft to oversight. Elias followed his hands shoved too deep into his pockets, shoulders hunched against the suit that once fit him like armor. I didn't realize how much your work mattered, he murmured. He didn't say I stole it. He didn't say I lied. He said what he always said, just enough to imply contrition without surrender. Clara tried to smile, but it trembled. We never wanted you to feel left out. She whispered as if a missing place card or a cropped photo was a feeling, not a decision. Lydia stayed silent. Her eyes fixed on the floor, loyalty still stitched into her refusal to speak. It was an apology, but diluted, wrapped in layers of deflection, phrased in ways that admitted nothing outright. Still, it was more than I had ever heard. I listened, my hands folded on the table, my watch ticking steady. The fire that used to rage inside me felt different now, less like a wound, more like a scar. I could hear their words, measure their tones, and know the truth behind them. This wasn't about love. This was about inevitability. The plaque, the contracts, the code hash, the Pentagon seal, records that had spoken so loudly that even silence could no longer bury them. When they finished, I answered calmly the way you answer when the verdict has already been delivered and you're only closing the file. You don't need to hang my photo on your walls, I said. My voice didn't rise, didn't waver. You don't need to raise a glass or toast my name or pretend to remember what you erased. Because I've already carved it where it can't be cropped. Their faces flickered confusion on Elias, anger tightening Marcus's jaw, Clara's eyes watering though no tears fell. Lydia stayed stone still. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words hang. The record is the record. You can't unwrite it. You can't smile it away. You can't pretend it belongs to anyone else. It's already there, engraved, sealed, logged. Not in your house, not in your story. In history. The silence that followed was heavier than any at the family table. Because this time it wasn't mine. It was theirs. Their silence, their inability to rewrite their late recognition echoing off walls that did not obey their choreography. Marcus finally stood his movement stiff. Well, he muttered, at least you've made something of it. As though it had been luck, not years of labor. As though acknowledgement could still carry a hint of dismissal. They left soon after, their footsteps retreating down the hall, the door clicking shut behind them. I sat alone again, the room quiet but not empty. My watch ticked steady. The plaque still gleamed in the photo Shannon had sent me, standing in the lobby of Pinnacle, where guests passed it daily. My name, my rank, my worth carved into steel. The family could come, could offer apologies wrapped in smoke, could whisper regrets 6 months too late. But I didn't need their frame. I didn't need their toast. I had already written myself into the record. And records, unlike families, do not forget. The camera lens reflected back at me a single dark circle catching the low light of my apartment. For a long moment, I didn't speak. The silence hummed steady, the same silence I had carried through every family dinner, every cropped photo, every missing place card. But this time, it wasn't erasure. It was choice. My silence. My pause. My control. When I finally leaned forward, my face filled the frame. No plaque behind me, no uniform at my shoulders, no table pressing me to the edge. Just me, plain and direct, the truth uncluttered. "You don't need permission to exist," I said. My voice was calm, not sharp, not bitter, simply steady, carved like the records I'd kept. You don't need to wait for someone to set a seat for you or to raise a glass in your name. You don't need to ask if you're allowed to belong. You already do. I let the words sit as if each one was its own line of evidence. For years, I thought the problem was that my family didn't see me. That if I worked harder, brought home more stacked enough achievements in front of them, they'd finally recognize me. But recognition doesn't work that way. They weren't blind. They chose not to look. And you know what? That choice is theirs to carry, not mine. I drew in a slow breath, my watch ticking faintly at my wrist, audible in the quiet. The truth is, this your proof isn't the toast they refuse to give. Your proof isn't the photo they crop you out of. Your proof is you. The work you've done, the scars you've carried, the receipts you've kept, the fact that you're still here. That's enough. That's everything. The camera caught the steadiness in my gaze. It wasn't a plea. It was a verdict. You don't need to sit in the chair they set for you. You don't need to match the script they rehearse. You don't need to follow the choreography of their silence. You can draw your own lines, build your own tables, keep your own record. And one day when the noise fades, what remains won't be their version of you, it will be yours. I let the smallest flicker of a smile touch my face. Not the polished kind Clara wore. Not the strained grin Elias rehearsed. Not the smirk Marcus claimed as charm. Mine. A smile unperformed. And if no one has told you this before, let me be the first: you don't owe anyone proof of your existence. You are the proof. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was presence. Full, undeniable. Have you ever drawn a boundary between yourself and your family's expectations? Share your story in the comments below. I want to hear it. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The camera light blinked once, then faded as I stopped the recording. The room returned to quiet, but it no longer felt like the silence of erasure. It was the silence of truth, finally spoken, carried forward, documented, not just in files or contracts or plaques, but in words carved into memory, into record, into history. And this time, the record was mine.